Hello, everyone, and today we have another very special guest. Before we introduce our guest, we want to give a shout out to our co-host, Corinne French.
Hey, excited to be here today. Can't wait to get started.
Yes, very exciting. We actually have another district from Oklahoma, or public school from Oklahoma. And before we introduce our guest, we do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's giving hundreds of millions of dollars away to public education around the U.S. So if your district needs unrestricted funds in the form of a free gift, reach out to Ideal Impact. Okay, today's guest, we have Superintendent Haynes from Spiro Public Schools. How are you doing today, Superintendent Haynes?
I'm doing fine, Dennis. How are you?
Doing great. And just so we could kick things off and our listeners learn a little bit about your background, could you share your story and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, Mr. Dennis. Well, typically, like most people, I got involved in public education as a student. Started at the school district as a pre-K or Head Start. Mom volunteered, and I got into Head Start, and then I stayed in the school district at Spiro for 12 years, graduated here, and went to college at Northeastern for 2 years. First started off at Carlisle State College for 2 years, a local junior college, and got my associates, then went to Northeastern to get my bachelor's. While at Northeastern, I realized how much impact the teachers that had taught me, how much impact that had in my life, and I thought that would be a great field to get into, to be an positive influence to other students and kids. So got my degree in education, came back to my home school to teach science, biology, anatomy, physiology, and botany, and then coach football and basketball and softball. So that's kind of what started my career. I did that for 2 years and was very successful. We had a very successful athletic program and success in the classroom. But I was given a business opportunity, and I developed a business and ran a business for 12 years. And that for 12 years, it took me to Kentucky, where I worked in Kentucky for 10 years in that business. And then my heart just drew me back to public education. And so I got started back there at Scott County as a ninth grade science teacher, and started my master's. I got offered a job back here in Oklahoma next to my home district as an administrator, principal, high school principal, and I worked there for 6 years. And then I came over to my current home district where I was born and raised here in Spiro as the superintendent, and then just finished my doctorate in May of last year. So that's kind of been my journey so far.
Wow. That's really cool. So teacher, business, back to public education, and just doing amazing things, got your doctorate. So curious, you mentioned public education drew you back. What was it about public education that drew you back?
Well, teachers, you either have a heart for education or you don't. That's just the way it is. And you can't deny that longing. You're not fulfilled. I don't believe anybody on this earth has ever been put here and found their niche that they haven't been fulfilled. And I believe a lot of people who's not in their niche aren't fulfilled. And so, I enjoyed it. I could tell it was my calling. I could tell it's what the good Lord had put on my heart to do. And so it was just my element. So getting back into public ed, it was an internal drawing to get there. And of course, I had my children were in school at that point in time. I had a third grader, a fourth grader, and a ninth grader. And so it was just kind of an easy decision to get back in there and make sure that I was familiar with the kids they were running around with, and I was familiar with the staff that would be working with them, and that if I had the opportunity to influence other kids in a positive manner, I was going to take advantage of that.
Very nice. No, I completely agree with you that we're all here for a purpose, right? And yeah, and that's great that you found yours. And Corinne, was there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, sure. I think the what's always interesting to me is when people um, try something and then they go back to something else. And so I think that's an interesting conversation. But what what did you study for your dissertation? Like, what was your topic and your research topic? I'm right in the middle of mine right now, and so it's
Gotcha.
always fun to hear what people are studying and how they came to that conclusion.
My topic was the influence of self-efficacy on teacher retention. So basically, how good a teacher thinks they are and how that plays into them staying into the profession of education.
Corinne, that's
Well,
right up your alley there.
I was just gonna say, I think this podcast timing is perfect for me. My topic is self-efficacy of trustees. So the women who I'm studying women who on their school boards and their self-efficacy. So I might have to read your dissertation. I might have to make sure I get.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
think self.
Are you using Bandura's self-efficacy theory?
Yeah, I am. And did
Pretty
you do?
typical.
Yeah, did you do mixed methods or quantitative or qualitative?
No, I did qualitative, excuse me. I could have done a mixed method, but I stay with qualitative.
Yeah. If my chair listens to this, she will think no, no, no. But I wish I could do I wish I could do mixed methods. I wish I could have done a survey and some quantitative and then qualitative. But for our listeners out there, we are geeking out or whatever the word is about going deep into this idea of research. And I think the idea of self-efficacy, it's important. And I wonder, like, when you have self-efficacy for something that you're doing and you believe you're here for a purpose, and that how it rubs off on other people. Like, and so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. Like what are ways that you're able to encourage based on the research you did? What were some of those ways that you're encouraging others?
Well, when staying with the research theme, with it being teachers and teacher retention, the majority of teachers that quit do so in the first 3 years. It depends upon where you look. It's 30 to 40%, and it's anywhere between 3 to 5 years of the first 3 to 5 years between when they leave the profession. And so I really focused on the novice teachers. And one thing that spoke to me a lot about my study was the fact that we gauge a lot of student success when they hit 6th grade to 12th grade area on test scores and benchmark scores and all those ACT, SAT, all those different types of assessments. But in reality, that's really not what makes teachers feel like, or help teachers feel like they're doing a good job. A lot of the teachers that I worked with on my study, it was about social development as much as anything, as opposed to the academic side of things. Kids using their manners in lower elementary, standing in line, learning how to do things like that, having empathy for others, things of that nature is what really drew out a lot of a detail for these, especially lower level or lower, grade level educators. They really grasped onto those types of things to felt like they were doing a good job. And so it's important, I feel like, as administrators or mentor teachers, to make sure that we keep the main thing in the fact of, yes, we have to take test scores. Yes, we have to have assessments. Yes, we have to have grades given. And those are all important benchmarks with our profession. But in reality, some of the most important work we do are things that can't be measured. Like I said, empathy towards another human being, their social development with their peers, things of that nature that it seems like in the society we live in today, they come to us with less and less of those skill sets between that age 2 and 4 degree, 2 and 4 year old development, which are so huge with social development skills, that they come to public education or any education for that matter, and those skill sets aren't as honed and as imprinted when we get them.
Yeah, go ahead, Corinne. Sorry.
No, I love that the first 3 years your study focused on that for teachers, because I think once you get past a certain spot, it, like, this is your calling, you're there, but you would hate for a new teacher in those early years to walk away from something that really is their calling, that we could do something about, like we can have some kind of an intervention. So I love that.
Yeah, it's funny, we've had some other guests on the podcast that focus on different elements. We had one guest that focused on love, right? Bringing love and what that really means. It's such a trivial word, it's thrown around these days, but what does it really mean? And, interacting with other people and how you communicate with people and how you deal with other people. And what you're describing seems like some, those character traits as well. And I think it's so powerful. You can know everything in the world. You could be the chat GPT of the world, but how you communicate and deal with other people is so critical to success in life. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. Within y'all's district, what are y'all doing to kind of hone those, build the character of students?
Well, there's tons of programs out there. we're in the Bible Belt. We're in the central part of the country, and so there's a strong faith to our culture and our community. We're a public school. We're not a private school, but it influences a lot of what we do with our kids from the perspective of we believe in respect for all. We believe that everybody is a human being and they deserve to be loved. We are actually right now revamping some of our vision and mission statements. I'm the KISS principle type guy. I just try to keep it simple. I tell people as long as our kids know that we care, the kids know that they're safe, and they know that we expect their best, we're making good decisions. And so, we do the typical programs that other schools do in different areas, but we really try to have good more personable conversations with our kiddos when we're dealing with behavioral issues. We try to reward good behavior. We try to make sure that there's a lot of positive reinforcement, a lot of praise that goes on. And then when we're dealing with, and it looks different at different levels. You look at that elementary level, it's more social development, how they're, working with their peers, how they learn to interact. As they scaffold up into middle school, then there's a little bit more dynamics that begin to kick in. They get a little bit more cliquish. They start forming groups. They start exhibiting sometimes behavior that is not productive, that's a little bit negative in the forms of way they talk about kids or how they interact on social media, things of that nature. And so explaining to kids that sometimes that's a protective defense mechanism for how they personally feel about themselves. They reach out and attack other people because of how they feel about themselves, and having good educational conversations with these guys to let them understand that, it's important that we develop good coping skills as we scaffold up through education, because life's not going away. People aren't going away. And these are good opportunities to learn good coping skills on how to deal with frustration or how to deal with an individual that may rub you wrong a little bit or you have a little friction with, because someday you're going to have that at a job, or someday you're going to have that in a relationship, second or third there, and so we try to take advantage of and use those as learning opportunities as opposed to just a discipline issue.
Yeah, that's so powerful. That is so powerful because it's a continuous process, right? Even as adults, we want to continue to learn to treat others with respect and how we communicate and work together. Very powerful. And so just thinking out loud here, I know you guys in Oklahoma, y'all have school choice now, right? Is that true or?
Well, it depends on what definition of school choice you use, Mr. Dennis, and who you talk to. So when you talk about school choice, you talk about vouchers or transfer legislation. A little bit, what exactly are you speaking to?
Oh, good point. So I know in Texas, this hasn't been passed, but there's, you hear discussions around the voucher program and that sort of thing. What kind of impact has that made in general? It doesn't have to necessarily be for your district, but what have you seen in general around that?
So just a little history for the state of Oklahoma. When it comes to legislation, like it is in most states, it really ends up being a rural versus an urban battle. It's not really public versus private. I know that sounds kind of silly, but it really comes down to that, because most of your rural districts are going to be public, just the nature of the way it's designed. Most of your private institutions and districts are going to be located in your urban city areas, mainly Tulsa, Oklahoma City for us. And so some of those legislation that's being pushed down through our legislators now, some of it warranted, is based on experiences during COVID. And a lot of districts within, like Tulsa is a school district with many sites within it. Same concept with Oklahoma City. And so that school district is considered a district, but with many schools within it. And so their policy didn't allow for transferring. In some schools, they could deny transfer, they could take a transfer. It was at the will of the receiving school district. And so they passed legislation to address that you couldn't just not let a kid come. There had to be certain criteria met before you could accept or not accept a student into your school district. And they were doing that because parents were frustrated during COVID because the policies of districts were so different. Neighboring districts could be totally different on how they felt about moving forward with in-person, face-to-face instruction virtual instruction. And so parents that live in a district A that may want their kids in face-to-face instruction, well, their district may be totally virtual. And then the neighboring district was meeting face-to-face. And so those teachers or excuse me, parents were trying to transition over to those face-to-face or vice versa, and was not having any success because of the policy of that district. They might not could have served them. They might not have had enough staff to serve them, or different reasons. But anyway, it caused a lot of hoopla. And so now the legislator got involved to try to eliminate that. As far as the vouchers, the state of Oklahoma still does not have vouchers. The state of Oklahoma has navigated that in a different way. What they have chosen to do is give tax credits to people who choose to send their school to a private school or to homeschool their child. Now, my concern about that, and I have visited with our state superintendent, Ryan Walters, about this, and we just agree to disagree on a couple of things. And the one thing that I feel like is that the Constitution for the state of Oklahoma is very clear that public dollars are not to be used for private tuition, period, end of discussion. So they don't do it that way. What they do is instead they give you a tax break. They give you a tax credit for that much money. Well, what happens is now is the taxes that these individuals or state are paying have been reduced, which is a form of revenue that supports a lot of different agencies in the state, namely one of them being public education. So public education dollars have been reduced while increasing the revenue for individuals who choose to send their child to a private school, which that's their choice. But what has happened, and I've done a study on this a little bit, an informal study, it was funny to look at the cost of a lot of these private schools before this legislation was passed and how much they increased their tuition when the legislation was passed. And it's very, if what you're thinking is they increased it by the month, that if you'd be amazed at how many you increased it just by how much the tax increased. And so the push was it was going to give parents who didn't have the financial resources to send their child to a private school. It would give them the opportunity now through tax credits to eliminate some of those boundaries financially and be able to take advantage of those tax credits. But that's not what necessarily took place. A lot of those private institutions just raised their tuition fee that much, and they got advantage of some public tax dollars now in a private situation. So my concern was if there's going to be if there's going to be private institutions or charter schools which are not held to the same academic criteria that public schools are held to, they're not held to the same accreditation criteria that public schools are held to. If they're going to use public dollars, they should be held to the same standard that public schools are held to. They should have to do certain tests. They should have to test out things of that nature. There should be some form of accountability. And so that's where me and Ms. Superintendent Waters tend to disagree a little bit.
Yeah, that does make sense. You're getting some additional funds to do a different route for education, but the expectations are different. So that's an interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard of it presented that way. That's why these discussions are so helpful, because you get to hear these different perspectives, because y'all are in the middle of it, right? Y'all are experiencing it. It's not theory. It's not just talking what if, so you're actually going through that. So
we're seeing it right now, correct?
Yeah, that is interesting. And I imagine with some of these private schools, if they did get a lot of people that wanted to go there, they probably couldn't handle them. So at the same time, it's a little bit of a supply and demand issue as well.
Well, that's another thing. All this legislation about public schools having to accept certain people regardless of what their capacity was, or if they had the capacity, they had to accept. If they didn't, private schools don't play the same game. They don't play by the same rules. If they don't want you, they don't take you, period. And what happens in Oklahoma, and this is a whole nother soapbox, is there's lots of private schools in Oklahoma at the high school level that manipulate their average daily membership, their ADM, the size of their school, to be placed in certain class sizes in the OSSAA, Oklahoma Secondary School Activity Association. So they manipulate their ADM so that they get to play at certain class levels in sports. Because if they were too big and they were bigger, then they would be playing the bigger guys. But they all try to keep their ADM at that 3A and 2A level. So they're competing in sports with 2A and 3A public schools, which is a whole nother issue.
Huh. I imagine a lot of this will kind of work its way out as, as things go on. And because I mean, everybody's got a similar, I like to think most parents have a similar goal of like,
I believe they do, Mr. Dennis. I believe most parents want what's best for their kids. I agree 100%.
yeah, so I guess, it'll all come out in the wash a little bit when,
It
when
will. It'll come to a head. What a lot of people speaking to private schools and public schools, and again, I have a family member. My nephew is a superintendent of one of the largest private schools in the state of Arkansas, and they're very successful athletically and academically. So I don't have anything against private or schools. I'm glad that people have the resources, but the reality is they have a different clientele.
yeah,
If you look at the type of students that are able to attend those type of institutions, the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority, two parent homes, college educated, six-figure income. There's just a lot of things like that when you go to a public school, we take one and we take them all. It
yeah,
doesn't matter. And so sometimes when you start comparing private and public school outcomes or private public school performance, it can be an apples to orange scenario because the product's not quite the same. You're not quite working with the same skill set.
yeah, yeah. I can see that as man, that's a complex issue. So,
Very complex.
I wish I knew the answer to it. I guess if
Uh,
I get,
you get that answer, Mr. Dennis. I mean, you both will be able to retire sometime.
yeah, yeah. I guess when you're dealing with people, it's it's a kind of a, it's a fluid situation. So, um, well, awesome. I know we're running short on time here. Before we close out, would love to hear. We love to have leaders in public education and that are doing great things, such as yourself. If you were to recommend someone to come on the podcast, who would you recommend? Or maybe there's a couple people.
Well, are you speaking towards public administrators, just people in education in general? What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it could be anyone. A lot of times we get other superintendents, but it could be another superintendent. It could be
I'll,
anyone.
I'll tell you, I'll tell you a good individual that comes from a larger district. We have a relationship with each other. He was a player of mine at one time here at Spiro, but now he's over the human resource department at Mustang High School in Oklahoma City. His
Okay.
name is Chris Tobler, Tobler, and he's very articulate. Has a good educational foundation to him. He gets to see education from a different side because of the size of the district that he works with. So he would be a great person, I think, to reach out to.
Got it. Okay. Appreciate you sharing. And thank you, Superintendent Haynes, for being on the podcast today. And for those that have been tuning in, please stay tuned for future episodes. And we do want to give a shout out to our sponsor one more time before we close out. If your district needs funding, if you need unrestricted funds for higher teacher salaries or whatever your district needs, reach out to Ideal Impact.